Welcome to Canon Fodder, episode 3. Today we're going to be covering A Confederacy of Dunces with author, Twitter shitposter, NUTMAN extraordinaire, Mr. Dan Baltic. Dan, how are you this evening?
'Tis I, the NUTMAN. I am good. Thank you for having me on, TR. Obviously, we go back a long ways. You've been on New Right, and it's great to see that you've started Canon Fodder, and obviously, A Confederacy of Dunces is near and dear to my heart as the author of the what many people are saying is the spiritual heir to Confederacy of Dunces, a novel entitled NUTCrankr. So it is a pleasure to be here to talk about two of my favorite things, The Confederacy of Dunces and NUTCrankr.
And I mean, you guys really did give me my big break in a lot of ways. You were one of the first podcasts that I went on, and you guys did get my name out there, and I'm always going to be grateful for that.
Oh, well, I mean, absolutely. To the extent that that's, accurate, I mean, you certainly deserved it. And, if someone else didn't, find you, well, I mean, someone would. Automaton is an excellent novel. And, frankly, we were lucky to be early adopters of T.R. Hudson.
I appreciate that. But the novel that we're talking about today, A Confederacy of Dunces, you have kind of ingratiated yourself as the John Kennedy Toole expert, whether you wanted to or not. You did an episode of Art of Darkness, friends of the show, obviously. We love those guys. On the life of John Kennedy Toole. And you also did an episode, or you didn't do the episode. Did you do an episode about NUTCrankr with the Tukey's Mag guys?
I did. So they did a review of Sidebar by the Tukey's Mag guys. It's their YouTube stream. They did a review of NUTCrankr, and afterward had me on for a separate episode for a Q&A. We touched on Dunces somewhat. And on New Right, Matt and I did a John Kennedy Toole Confederacy of Dunces episode, which actually aired prior to the Art of Darkness episode, which, they, frankly, probably blew us out of the water because we all know those guys do a incredible amount of research, and, they're the gold standard for literary podcasts.
Definitely. 100% I co-sign on all of that. My history with this book is a little love and hate. My wife actually introduced me to this book when we were dating, and she said,
"Oh wow,
this is a book that you'll really love. It's the funniest book that I've ever read." And I don't typically take recommendations as soon as somebody tells me I have to do something. Like, I never did any of my reading in college.
Yeah,
as soon
understandable.
As soon as somebody tells me that I have to read something, I'm automatically against it. So I read the first chapter, and I was like, "Oh, this is amusing," and I put it down, and I never picked it back up. I read NUTCrankr. I blurbed it, and I mean, it's a great book. It's so funny. I really enjoyed, and I'm a guy that doesn't like sequels, who's in the middle of writing a sequel, and I almost want you to write a sequel to NUTCrankr. I want to keep it pure in a kind of way, but
I feel that.
Obviously, I really enjoy your writing. So anything that you put out, I'm gonna read, and that anybody out there listening to this who doesn't know Dan, go read his book. If you're not laughing, you're gonna kind of recognize yourself a little bit in Spencer Grunhauer, especially in the Sphere. I think I even put that in my blurb.
I believe so. Yeah, that it would be many on our side would be uncomfortably familiar
Yeah,
with
yeah.
Spencer, and frankly, that I think that is true. and that that was the intention. So I'm glad I hit that mark. And NUTCrankr 2, by the way, is coming. And my plan right now is to, eventually publish the full novel, of course, but to release it serially on my Substack. So the first chapter, which is going to be the sort of prologue to what starts, Spencer on his new adventure, is coming soon on my Substack, danbaltic.substack.com.
Did I just break that? Is that breaking news?
Maybe. I possibly have mentioned it other places,
Well,
but
I'm going to claim it at that
fair enough.
Canon Fodder broke this news, so you can only get that here at Canon Fodder in the Double Dealer magazine.
Exactly.
Confederacy of Dunces. Sorry, but I'm so spoiled to have you here. I want to go off in like 5 different directions.
Yeah, no, we'll stay on Dunces. I'll stop shilling. Don't worry.
We need to stay on Dunces because it's a book that deserves to be talked about.
100%.
Ignatius J. Reilly is a chaotic hero. I think I'm not the first person to ever say that, and I certainly won't be the last. But he's also not the primary character of a Confederacy of Dunces. Every character in this book is a weirdo, and I was talking to our mutual friend Chris Sandbatch, who actually hates this book, and he's from New Orleans, and I was telling him I thought that the city of New Orleans takes weirdos, it attracts weirdos, and then Flanderizes them, and I think that's what you get with Ignatius. He gets worse throughout the book, so much so, and we're gonna dive into spoilers. As much as I hate like spoiler culture, the idea of like saying spoilers, I'm gonna say that every episode of this podcast. But Ignatius is going to be about to be committed by his mother because he's just too much to deal with, and then he escapes to New York with his kind of girlfriend Myrna Minkoff, who we'll get to. So yeah, I think New Orleans is a city of weirdos that it's like a crab in a bucket mentality, and I think. Well, let me get your thoughts on that, Dan.
So I am not super familiar with New Orleans. I've only been there in my early 20s, and I was mostly drunk. So I can't really speak to that. But I do think, to the extent that one can embody the kind of dialect and, ethos of a region of the country, it certainly, if I don't have the knowledge to say whether it is faithful, and I guess I don't, it certainly is convincing. And it he describes the he gets into not only, so just to set for the listeners, if you don't know Ignatius is kind of like a 1960s version of a NEET. He is a 30-year-old overweight man who has a master's degree, who is unemployed, living with his mother, who is overbearing, and he is a reactionary of a sort of muddled politics. He seems to, favor some sort of monarchical integralist society, and he is coexisting in 1960s New Orleans with the the or not even proto, the kind of like blooming, so to say, civil rights movement and whatnot, and the kind of the characters of the day in New Orleans. So there is also a African American worker in a bar who figures into the plot. There is a sort of body shop, bar manager named Lana Lee. There is a the manager of a shoe factory or a pants factory that Ignatius works at, which is called the Levi Pants Factory. So it's Mr. Levi.
No relation to Levi Strauss, by the way.
Exactly. And his wife is a sort of overbearing woman of a particular. I mean, she's like a proto awful, and one of the best aspects of Confederacy of Dunces is the fact that this novel is so prescient. So one of the perfect encapsulations or crystallizations of that is that the wife of this owner of the pants factory, this kind of like wealthy, awful. And so for, our readers, if you don't know what that is, that's affluent, white,
female liberal.
There we go. She has a kind of social justice mission to enhance the life of this elderly single female employee, whose name I forget at the moment.
Miss Trixie,
who is totally, not only, I mean, maybe she was once competent, she is no longer competent. Her husband, Mr. Levy, wants to fire her, but the wife won't let him. And so, and crucially, she herself wants to quit, but she is not being allowed to quit. So it's this kind of dynamic where you have this woman who's a proto-awful, who is exhibiting all the characteristics of attempting to make progressive social change while actually making everything worse. And there's so many other examples of this in the novel, where Toole not only digs into the specifics of New Orleans society in that day, at least as far as I can tell. I was not alive in the 60s, and New Orleans is not a place I'm particularly familiar with. But it's also, I can say with confidence, a very prescient novel, so much so that, reading it, you kind of realize that the issues we're talking about today are issues that people have been talking about for a very long time.
I think that's very well said.
Hmm.
I want to move, because there's a lot to this novel. Centrally, Ignatius. I mean, if there were no Ignatius, one, the plot wouldn't work, but I also think that it'd be a lesser work. There haven't been many characters like Ignatius Reilly, except
Absolutely.
for, I mean, he is a modern day Don Quixote, as I alluded to before, and as many have alluded to. And
Absolutely.
Ignatius, throughout the novel, he's guided by Fortuna. Like he's guided by the, basically, fate, let's call it.
Yeah.
He's often just saying, Fortuna, Jesus, you have the wheel, right?
Yes.
And after I finished reading it, and you see Ignatius, he's in the car with Myrna. He just sees the asylum ambulance that was coming to pick him up to commit him, right? Drives past, right? And he pulls kind of a move on Myrna, a weird move. He sniffs her hair, right?
Yeah.
Right, but this is totally outside his realm. And I bring this back to my theory about the city, but I think Fortuna has a degree to do with it as well. All of these things were keeping him, we're dragging him down into this absurdity, and as he leaves the city, like, he kind of turns into, like, a regular guy. Have you ever you saw One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, right?
I have, yeah.
Okay, so the kid, I think his name is Billy, right? Who's committed.
Yeah.
And then he has sex with the girl, and suddenly he's like just a regular guy for like 5 minutes.
Sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I kind of see Ignatius as. He's and Myrna in one of their letters, because one of the things about this book is half of it is just written correspondence between Ignatius and Myrna, and their whole their differing personalities, but they're both also trying to impress one another. It's like snail mail flirting.
Yeah, I mean,
And
it's kind of like like one of our guys and an e-girl
yep,
almost.
yep, that's a good analogy. And the whole time in one of the letters, Myrna says, you stay in your room, you always recount this one bus story, because the bus story is this one somewhat bad experience that he had on a bus, so he'll never get on a bus again. And he tells it to everybody. It's like that is his, up until that point, that is the most significant event of his life.
Yeah,
Is this bus incident?
it's
But
his Stalingrad.
right. And Myrna in the letters, like, I'm worried about you. If you came to New York, you would flourish, right? And
Yeah,
we kind of, I guess, in a way, she's right, and I think she's correct there, and I think the end of the novel kind of points to that. But all that is to say, let's kind of talk about these characters a little bit more. Sorry, unless you have something to add there. It's just there's a lot to talk about this book, and
not
I
really, except the fact that the ending is one thing that I love about the ending is it is definitely, though, and I've touched on this previously, is though John Kennedy Toole had a very black pill ending himself. And spoiler alert, he committed suicide before Confederacy of Dunces was published. But the ending of Dunces, in my opinion, is a huge white pill. He's as you say, he's about to be committed, but he takes off with this kind of like frenemy love interest who is this woman he loves to hate, and again, a similar fashion to like a kind of edge lord and like one of these like e-girls or something like that. And it seems like they're riding off into the sunset on some new wild adventure. And like I wish that John Kennedy Toole's own life took that direction.
yeah, I would. This is a New York Times or a Pulitzer Prize winning book, back when that meant something, and one of the great tragedies. Obviously, anytime somebody kills themselves, it's a tragedy. But um, this was a clearly very talented writer,
Yeah,
and his life was just cut too short, by
absolutely.
his own hand, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to derail the conversation or get into his suicide too soon, so we could save that for later if you prefer. But
Uh,
I obviously have thoughts on it.
right. Well, I mean, you might as well now, and then we'll
Okay,
transition more back to the book.
so yeah, he was going back and forth with so to kind of set the scene. The 1960s in American letters were very different from American letters today. So much so that someone named John Kennedy Toole in New Orleans could write to a man named Robert Gottlieb, who was the equivalent of like one of the most important editors at one of the most important publishing houses of its day. So imagine you're writing to the executive editor of Random House or something like that, of their most prestigious imprint. And rather than just like never receiving a response and it going to some slush pile that an intern never reads, to say nothing of the diversity politics of today, which would dictate that it would never be read. But beyond that, far from that, it not only was it read within a week, he got a letter from this guy Gottlieb saying, "I read your novel and it has a lot of promise. I want to talk about it." And so, like, amazing today that this would be unheard of, incredible. So Toole went back and forth with Gottlieb about the novel, and one of the kind of the tragedy, and it starts very fortuitously. It starts, in a very has a very auspicious start, but Gottlieb has some really misguided ideas about what a Confederacy of Dunces should be. He essentially doesn't think it should be a comic novel. He wants to turn it into some sort of tragic novel, which, in some respects I suppose it is, but ultimately it's, the genre is comedy. And that is, not what it was meant to be. But nevertheless, Toole, who is, this unknown, is corresponding with a man who is at the height of American letters. And so he is bending over backwards to try to transform Dunces into something it's not. And he goes back and forth with him, back and forth. And, ultimately it ends in a sort of stalemate or whatever, where Gottlieb, says, we can't publish it in this form. And, rather than pushing on and saying, well, I just spoke to the number one guy in publishing, maybe I should speak to the number two guy, the number three guy, or the number, 207 guy. Toole, he grew very discouraged. He didn't really make a push for it again. And ultimately, he, to what extent this was influenced by the failure to publish Dunces and the failure to receive acclaim from, to garner readers even, he did commit suicide. And that, obviously is a tragedy, as you say, when anyone commits suicide, particularly a tragedy in Toole's case, because he, in fact, had written a wonderful novel, an exceptional novel, which, through the efforts of his mother, posthumously, she got in touch somehow with Walker Percy, who was a contemporary of John Kennedy Toole's. And famously, Walker Percy, he, was, being petitioned by this crazy woman, this mother of this, this young man who he knew, this promising young man who killed himself. And, Walker Percy's a busy guy. He's a famous writer by that point. But this woman, this distraught mother, wants him to read her son's novel, her deceased son's novel. And so he says, yes, I'll do it, kind of just to get her off his back. And he hoped, and he's written this down, I don't know exactly where, but it is, in the record, that he truly hoped it would be awful, so he should just, put it to bed and say, there's nothing I can do, ma'am. I'm sorry about your son. But he started reading it and he realized, this is exceptional. This is very good. This needs to be published. And so the trajectory from there was, it was published. It received eventually. So Toole killed himself probably in like 68 or 69. And this novel, Dunces, received the Pulitzer in like 81 or 82. So over a decade after he died, he received the Pulitzer posthumously. And, that is, some combination of a black pill and a white pill. It is certainly a tragedy, but, it certainly is, in retrospect, it's very affirming to know that he received the recognition that he was due, thanks to his tenacious mother. And yeah, it's I don't even remember how I got on this line of topic exactly, but it's his suicide is a tragedy. The ultimate publishing of Dunces is a triumph, and it should be, I mean, in my mind, a lesson to any writer out there. If someone says your work isn't good, um, you know, especially if that person, it doesn't matter if that person is like the head of, number one person in American letters. I mean, obviously today that holds a lot less weight than it did then, but never mind that, because there's probably someone who thinks that your writing is good, and maybe there are a lot of people. So in, a kinder world, a better world, not Ignatius, John Kennedy Toole would have, kept pushing on, and he would have found, the right publisher, and he would have received the recognition that would have at least quelled some of his demons. And maybe he wouldn't still be with us today. He's too old for that. But he would have been with us for longer and produced yet more works, and perhaps yet greater works.
I don't know how to transition out of that except to say that I agree. But to get back to the novel itself, it starts out with almost like a vaudevillian sort of happening. You have Ignatius, who is standing outside a department store while his mother's inside. I think even just something like she's kind of a larger woman who likes her sweets, right? And she's getting
True.
sweets. And in a city like New Orleans, which is known for its characters, you have Ignatius, who's this, pretty fat, disheveled looking guy wearing this green hunting cap and his ill-fitting clothes that he wears because in his morality it is the correct it's morally correct to dress as he does. And he has many diatribes in the novel about the way people dress, and every opinion under the sun that he has, he bases it on this strange quasi-Catholic philosophy. We can get into Boethius a little bit later, and his influence on the novel.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this kind of inept policeman, patrolman Mancuso, he stops Ignatius because he's new to the force, he's being hazed, and his sergeant keeps telling him, you better find me some suspicious characters. This the overconfidence of Ignatius plus the underconfidence of Mancuso creates a whole scene, right? So Ignatius is talking about how he's going to sue the city. He's going to contact his attorneys. He has his many attorneys, right? So his team of attorneys, right? You have an old man who we later kind of get to know better, Mr. Robichaux. He's getting into it now, calling Mancuso a communist.
This is true.
Saying how all the police are communists, by the way. This attracts a large crowd, so much so that now Robichaux is actually the suspicious character. He's the one that gets arrested, and Mrs. Reilly and Ignatius are able to escape, and they escape into the bar, the Night of Joy, right? Which is the bar / strip club that Lana Lee, who is the manager / porn star, is the proprietor of.
Very true.
That's all the first scene, by the way. And it sets up the events for the rest of the novel, because Mrs. Reilly gets drunk, as she's wont to do. She is a drinker, much like, it's funny. It doesn't get mentioned a lot, but all of Ignatius's appetites, he doesn't drink, but he eats a lot. And while nobody ever calls out Mrs. Reilly for raising this son, uh, who is in his 30s. He's kind of living at home, and she is a complete enabler of him.
This is true. I mean,
And
she tries to. I mean, one of the plot devices is she, due to a drunken accident that occurs following his arrest, or attempted
arrest,
arrest.
yeah, and their escape to the Night of Joy.
Yeah, she incurs potentially some liability, so she sends him finally. He's a NEET essentially, and she sends him to work. So his forays into the workplace, I mean, obviously she should have probably cracked the whip a little bit sooner than that. But she does send him out to become a working man, and that provides a lot of grist for the mill for more hilarity, as this again kind of edgelord Spurg type that we are familiar with today, only set in the 1960s, attempts to navigate what can be, I guess, charitably called office culture, and following the failure of his time, and we can get into that if you want, at the Levi Pants
Oh, we have
factory.
to. We have to. It's the funniest scene in the book.
That absolutely. He becomes a hot dog vendor, which is, even like today, hot dog vendors are not thought of very highly. But apparently during the 1960s in New Orleans, his mother was beside herself, and it was seen as a practically akin to being a hobo. So there's a lot of humor that goes into Ignatius's work experiences.
He also refuses to sell the hot dogs and just eats them himself.
Yeah, he is a man of
So
appetites.
his weight problem, that was he already had a weight problem, but he just gains so much weight after working at this hot dogs as this hot dog vendor, who refuses to sell hot dogs to anybody, because that would get in the way of his consumption.
Absolutely. And he's an antisocial guy, so he's just not very far from like being good at selling things. He actually kind of, even when people want to buy hot dogs from him, he's like, "Fuck you! I'm not going to sell you a hot dog," which is just hilarious.
What do you think I am, a hot dog vendor?
Exactly.
And I think one of the most brilliant parts about this book is Toole created a logic to everything everything the characters do. There is a logic behind it. They explain it clearly and concisely, and even if it's completely insane, it makes sense from that perspective. Right? So
Absolutely.
So Ignatius, this is a well thought out and complete character, and everything he does has a reason. You might not agree with it. You might think that it's nuts, but you're not standing around and say, "Well, why would he do that?" I think one of the things that I do on this is it helps me to air out my grievances with modernity. Right? That's part of the reason I have this podcast.
Sure.
But a lot of the lol so random writing of today, and we can think of how many examples of that, where just a character acts out of character just because they want to, because it's convenient for the plot. a lot of writers don't understand their characters these days.
Yeah.
And maybe part of it is that Toole is tapping into himself a little bit. I mean, to an extent that all writers are writing themselves.
Absolutely.
Your keyboard's coming in a little bit there, guy.
Yeah. No, I'm just writing.
I see. Sorry. Anyway, yeah. So Ignatius is a fully born out character. Everything he does makes sense, and it's difficult. That is difficult to do, and it's not just him. His mother makes sense. Mancuso makes sense. Lana Lee, the makes sense. Darlene, the wannabe stripper, everything she says, because she's dumber than a sack of rocks, right? But her aspiration in life is that she wants to be a stripper and she wants to have her parrot as part of her act. So we have this cavalcade of characters, and they all make sense within their own internal logic, even if we think they're ridiculous. And that's I guess that's part of the irony is that we quote unquote normal people can see them as ridiculous, but they don't see that they are a joke.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so that is kind of one of the things that I love the most about Dunces, and that I've mirrored in my own writing. It's a sense of dramatic irony where the characters are behaving ridiculously, and the author knows it, but the characters don't know it. And it creates the opportunity for some truly hilarious moments. And beyond that, it's like a literary technique that, in my opinion, creates a sort of intimacy between the author and the reader, because you're bonding over how ridiculous the characters are.
Probably the most ridiculous thing that Ignatius does in the book is, and in order to garner the affections of his pen pal slash former friend, like former classmate, and also wannabe love interest, Mirna Minkov. He stages at the Levi Pants factory the job that he got as he's the basically the filing guy.
Yeah.
He stages a workers' revolt in order to well, I mean, he wants to murder the office manager, Mr. Gonzalez.
Yeah.
But he never makes he's very educated, so he's able to use big words, and these are simple folk that he's trying to rally up. So they don't understand what he's saying, but they think that this is a way for them to get better pay.
Yeah.
So they get behind him only because of their own interests. So Ignatius, he does his best Lenin impression. He gets on the table and he starts giving this speech that sputters out. He has these people hold up a banner that is just his never washed bed sheet. So think of the people who are normal change their sheets like what, once a week, once every 2 weeks, right?
I think that's accurate.
Yeah, think of a guy who has barely leaves his room, and let's be generous and say in 10 years he hasn't changed this bed sheet.
Sounds about right.
And he's having these people hold it up like they're marching with a banner down the street. I don't even think he has anything written on it, right? It's literally just the sheet with a bunch of unknown stains of unknown origin.
I don't recall exactly what, if anything, was on the sheet, but the one of the most hilarious parts of this to me is so this is set in the 60s and it's tied into the civil rights movement, of course. And so Ignatius, perhaps unlike edgelords of today, he fashions himself a Christian humanist. He, wants to kind of upraise all peoples, and crucially, he wants to kind of compete with this, as you said, love interest, Myrna Minkoff, who is a progressive. So he is organizing the factory workers at the Levi Pants factory, who are predominantly African American, and he labels this organization effort as the Crusade for Moorish Dignity, which is just hilarious by any person's standard. And yeah, so it's just this amazing, we I don't think we necessarily even really see into Ignatius's political opinions in that particular realm. But in this instance, he is, trying to outdo Myrna in his concern for the, so-called downtrodden, and he launched this crusade for Moorish dignity, which is aimed at launching a sort of revolt against the middle management of this
The
pants factory.
Hispanic middle
Exactly.
manager
Yes,
who
the
is just holding everything together with gum and paper clips and duct tape.
exactly.
And
And
I
tell
think
me if this doesn't seem a close parallel to similar events that occur today and in recent times.
oh definitely. And I think with every obstacle that Ignatius runs into, that it's usually a person that just is trying to get along their normal life, you know. So everybody kind of placates him in a way because they can't be bothered to do anything outside of their normal routine. You have Mancuso at the beginning who's just trying to catch a suspicious character. He doesn't care who, right? You
Yeah.
have his mother who doesn't really like, she just kind of wants to bowl with her friends and she wants to like kind of have a life, and while she doesn't
Yeah.
often blame her son for the state of her life, like she does kind of, but she more likes to complain about her life than actually do anything about it. uh
Yeah.
where have we seen this before? And then
Very
in the
true.
office you have Mr. Gonzalez, who is incompetent but just competent enough to keep his job, and is so meek that he can't retire Miss Trixie, who is senile, who comes to work in like a bathrobe, uh, because she doesn't know where she is. Uh, Mr. Levi, the owner of the Levi Pants factory, he hates Levi Pants. He hates the company. He inherited it and he only keeps it running because it's a source of income for him. Uh,
Exactly.
and Mr. Gonzalez, has to do the work of three people because Ignatius doesn't do his filing job. And anytime somebody tries to get Ignatius to do something he doesn't want to do, he suddenly has almost like a heart attack, but all completely all psychosomatic, right? And he says that his valve is closed.
Yeah. So Ignatius seems to be like in this seems to be like in an early way of like describing what I guess,
I
libs,
have
they're
anxiety.
anxious. Yeah, anxiety, or particularly, I suppose, irritable bowel syndrome.
Mm,
He has some, he has some gas issues, and this is, I guess, a 1960s way of describing it, an Ignatius way of describing it, but there are, odes to his gases and his valves and his stomach. And one thing that strikes us as we go through this is, as you mentioned, essentially everything would be like fine, it would go swimmingly if Ignatius were just like somewhat normal. If he were just like, he has like a kind of like make work job, it doesn't really matter. All he needed to do was show up and like not cause trouble, and he can't do that. And this repeats itself in like many other directions, in many other instances in the novel. And it again, I hate to, keep, making it, trying to make this, parallel to today. But, certainly there are many people who would say, to E-right or edgelord type people, like, why don't you just grill? Oh, well, what are you worried about? Just, stop.
just let people have fun.
Yeah. It just,
What's Ignatius doing to you? You know,
yeah, just,
and
stop worrying about these things. Just, you're doing okay. And, Ignatius is kind of like an early adopter of it's so over, bro.
it's so it, he. I think he goes through 3 different cycles of "it's over" and "we're back."
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, you make allusions to society today, but I think they're well founded. Especially, let's say Ignatius is enabled not just by his mother, but by the city of New Orleans. I happen to think that this is a very dark book about an
Hmm,
evil city that ruins people.
hmm.
Um, that Ignatius that he's cast into the role of eccentric, and everybody else around him, rather than pushing back, rather than somebody saying, "Hey, get your shit together," enable him to what's that Simpsons meme? Say the line, Bart.
Yeah.
And it, I mean, yeah, you see everything that comes out of New Orleans, and again, it's not a city that I'm super familiar with, but just everything that you hear about uh, what is essentially Sin City 2, let's say.
Hmm.
Um, he Ignatius is compelled by his surroundings to be as eccentric as possible, just like everybody else is. And they're all kind of bumping into each other in their eccentricities, but also trying not to bother one another. Because if you know, and Sandbash pointed this out to me when I talked to him, if you notice in the dialogue, nobody talks to another person. They just kind of have it's like they have a pull string on the back for each conversation,
Hmm.
and everyone's all the conversation in the book is filtered through what they want out of it. If that if and I can go into a little
Yeah,
bit more detail, but do you pick up what I'm saying?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I think to a certain extent, knowing or sensing like what type of writer Tool is, I suspect he comes into like scenes with like kind of like really like preconceived ideas of what the characters are thinking, which kind of leads itself to, less fluid dialogue and
Mm,
more just kind of like, you know, um, the, like if you kind of like go into a scene knowing what one character thinks and not really getting into the mind of the other character as much, the dialogue is maybe going to be a little more one-sided and,
Well,
kind
see,
of
I don't
declaratory and responsive.
I don't think that's the case so much. I think that he understands all the characters very well, and he's almost keeping them each one of them in their own box, right? He's put blinders on each character. So,
Sure.
Ignatius is only going to talk about what he wants, right? And his mother is only going to talk about what she wants, and they don't their conversations don't gel like a normal conversation does. They're kind of just playing parts. So Ignatius is his, whatever character Ignatius is, that's him. And then you have the bereaved widow, Mrs. Reilly, who has this son that she can't stand, and that, oh, woe is me kind of life, right?
Yeah.
And she's just playing out that character in every single scene. Then you have Mancuso, who's like the down and out sort of police officer, and he's just, he's walking around trying to be, Barney Fife, let's say, but he's a joke in his precinct. But he's going to still keep up that golly gee willikers sort of attitude, regardless.
Yeah.
I think that the city of New Orleans in this book is a perverse stage, and each of the characters is just a to plug my own book, an automaton of kind of acting out their own role in the stage production of New Orleans. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. I mean, I agree that the kind of like the interchanges between the characters, the dialogue, it is, rarely fruitful. The characters do not like arrive at catharsis through dialogue. With some exceptions, I would say kind of toward the end, or not toward the end, at the very end, when Ignatius is taking off with Myrna, there is a kind of sense of movement, literal and figurative, in both characters' arcs. But I do see what you're saying, and yeah, in general, the kind of characters are psychologically siloed. I would say that's a fair characterization.
It's a good comparison. The Truman Show.
Yeah.
So this is the Ignatius show.
Agreed.
And just like at the end of the Truman Show, Ignatius bucks his role, and he escapes to find legitimacy, like to find who he really is, but like in a less gay way.
Yeah.
Because everybody these days is writing to find out who they are.
True.
But so yeah, that's my take on the novel. And I think that's a bit darker than people kind of at face value see this book.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're not wrong in that. So Ignatius is obviously, he has blinders on. He has his own ideas. He cannot perceive reality the way it actually exists. And, usually in some novels, in my novel, you have one character like that, but the other characters are a little more savvy. They kind of understand the world. And but in Dunces, yeah, I think it is fair to say to some extent that the other characters are, again, not quite as, but to some extent as oblivious as Ignatius.
So, and I put a lot of stock into this theory. I haven't done a lot of research into the scholarship of this book, if there is any. But you notice that in all of the letters, well, not all, but many of the letters that he sends to Myrna, he signs it. In one particular one, he signs it until later, Gary, your militant working boy. You know, he's signing off as a character. He
Yeah.
understands that he's playing a role, more or less. And you know what? His mother wants to put him in an insane asylum, so it could be that this is all colored by, maybe he deserves to be in an insane asylum, and this is all colored by Ignatius's mental illness, and he of course sees Fortuna as an actual he actually sees people as marionettes on strings, and Fortuna is working them out, and he kind of, maybe he sees himself as a character in a play or in a book, and of course nobody else does, and all his interactions are just colored by this idea in his head that he is just a slave to fate itself, and he sees everybody else as a slave to fate. That's a new thought I just had, so not completely borne out, but I think it's at least interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think, Ignatius's philosophy is, not entirely coherent, but what is, is certainly relevant is his way of looking at the world colors and forecloses other interpretations. So yeah, I mean, like, the reality of his like leading the crusade for Moorish dignity at the pants factory, it's obvious to anyone that like what he is doing is destructive. It is, attempting to kind of aggrandize himself at the expense of the functioning of the company, with no real benefit to the people who he claims to like be, trying to benefit. But in his own mind, this, he's created rationales and reasons that make this work. So I would say Ignatius is probably the prime offender in this regard. He is the one who is, maybe the most detached from reality. But, certainly you do have others like his, his mother, obviously, is, somewhat, I mean, she is, grounded in reality enough to understand that her son has serious issues. But, I mean, I don't think she has the social intelligence or what have you to understand exactly what those issues are and what needs to be done. But, well, maybe that's too much to ask for, anyone. If you have an Ignatius, that's he's a hard figure to figure out.
I think, okay, so I think the only person that is in touch with reality in the whole novel is Jones, who is the sort of,
Sure, I could see that.
he's the porter at the Night of Joy. He
Yeah,
is, this just kind of down on his luck black guy in New Orleans, and his only ambition in life at this point is he just doesn't want to be bothered by the police, right? So he tries to stay out of trouble. He tries to keep to himself as much as he can, and if he sees an opportunity to forward the goal of not being bothered by the police, he will take it, to comedic effect later in the novel when he sells out his boss, Lana Lee, the pornographer and manager of the bar.
yeah,
I think he's the only one who's in touch with reality, and he's kind of just sitting there like these crazy whites are living in La La Land, and I hate
Yeah.
to inject sort of modern
Yeah.
thoughts on this, but I think that is I'm wondering if Toole does this intentionally, and if he's trying to say something about race in America.
I
Because
mean,
I don't think
so
if I think the seeds are there, but I think it does take some reach to get there. If I'm
So
making sense.
interestingly enough, his first novel, only other novel, which he wrote in high school, which was, I believe, also posthumously published, the Neon Bible. It's much more straightforwardly progressive. He's kind of criticizing the prejudices of small town white America, and it needs to be kind of taken into context, given that he wrote it while he was in high school. He literally wrote it as a 17 year old.
I'm
So
16 and this is deep.
yeah, exactly. So whether so Dunces was written probably in his mid to late 20s. He presumably had evolved somewhat considerably by then. He had lived in New York. He had, he was a bit worldly. I don't know to what extent he would have a kind of simplistic understanding of these things. That being said, this was also a different time in America where it was indeed, to some extent countercultural to be into the civil rights movement, and he was a writer and an artist, so he probably it's hard to say exactly where, and I've thought about this a good deal, where Toole's actual politics lie. He never wrote about this definitively. He never spoke about this definitively. But it's safe to say that he thought himself to be more libertine, certainly, than was popular in the early 1960s, and in the era where he came to be came of age. So he probably did, to some extent, align himself with the politics of his social predilections.
And I think you see that maturity borne out in Confederacy. I haven't read Neon Bible. It took me long enough to read his masterpiece. I haven't read his deep cuts yet.
Fair
Um,
enough.
but I think when he wrote Mirna Minkoff, he saw that the excesses of
Yes,
the social
agreed.
progressive ideals that he may have held or may have once held, but he had enough life experience to say, okay, this is just as ridiculous as anything else. In chapter 7, and I have the book open right now because this is just one of my of all the letters between these two, I think this is the best one. You have Mirna is coming down to New Orleans at the YMHA, which I guess it's like the YMCA for the book, right? And she's going to have a lecture on sex in politics, erotic liberty as a weapon against reactionaries. Right. Sign now and save America from sexual ignorance, chastity, and fear. Are you committed enough to help in this bold and crucial movement? And this is something that she's sending out to people, right? This is a flyer. And
Absolutely.
you have Ignatius who the two both fascinate each other, and I think they see each other as a project to be fixed, right? So he wants to try and turn her almost into a nun, and she wants to deflower him and turn him into she wants to have sex with an incel in order to stop him from doing a mass casualty event, let's say.
Exactly.
Right,
Yeah.
right. She is the state mandated GF.
Yes.
She
I
that
think
that that
that's fair.
that's her, right? Uh, and in this letter that she sends with the flyer, right? She's talking about how she was. Let's see. She meets this guy who thinks that the Pope is trying to assemble a nuclear armory. That she in this one section she says the next day I got a telephone call from this man, right? Would I like to lecture to the social action group he was going to form somewhere in Brooklyn? I was overcome. In this world of dog eat dog, it is a rare find to find a friend, a real sincere friend, or so I thought. Well, to make my point as briefly as possible, I had learned the hard way that the lecture circuit is something like show business, the casting couch, and that routine. Get what I mean? Again, I have been awakened to the fact that my body appeals to some people more than my mind. To this, Ignatius says, ho hum. And then she finds out that this sort of this sort of social justice warrior, right? He turns out to be a Klansman.
Oh yeah.
So and she's slept with this Klansman who talked who talked about everything that he had to talk about to get into her pants. And she get the only thing she gets from this experience is I need to start my own lecture series.
Yeah. No, I mean obvious parallels to today. Not to be a broken record here, but
And I had to bring that part up of the book because I think that encapsulates much of what I love about it, as well as I don't know. It's just really funny to me that that
oh,
even back
absolutely.
then, even back then, men said whatever they had to get some.
Yeah.
Uh,
No rare damn Baltic face stocks, as they say.
uh, so Dan, we've been going a little bit over an hour here, uh, and I'm we'll go as long as you have time. But I wanted to know if you had anything you wanted to bring up about the book.
Hmm. I mean, so obviously, as I mentioned, the dramatic irony is just something that I love. The sense that Ignatius does not know what's going on, but the reader knows, the author knows, and this is a technique that I employ in my own writing. So I find it to be hilarious, and it's something which has certainly deep roots in the literary tradition. It's not for nothing that people say that Don Quixote is a predecessor of a Confederacy of Dunces. And yeah, so the style is something that is not only comedically effective, but very Lindy. And if there's something I want to impress upon the listeners most strongly, it would probably be that this is a novel written in the mid to early 1960s that nails a lot of the social dynamics that exist today. And it shows us that the things that we have been fighting about and kind of struggling over have plagued society for quite a long time. And these questions that we're dealing with, perhaps they have different specifics, different implications, but they're Lindy questions about the roles of men and women, about the rules of sexual propriety, about being about having a normal one, and being weird. And this is, to my estimation, this is John Kennedy Toole's. It's important to some extent to know that Toole himself was always a bit of an outsider. He clearly has a level of compassion for Ignatius. And, this is in some sense an ode to being an outsider. And I think that's, not only one of the best ways to understand a Confederacy of Dunces, but that is, borne out by, it's rare, I feel, that an author's life and a novel become as intertwined as Toole's and Dunce's have become, because he, as we discussed before, took his own life before he could, experience the success of Dunces. And to the extent that he was, and it's not clear that he was the model for Ignatius, he probably wasn't exactly, but no writer can say that any of his characters truly emerged from, from Zeus. They emerged from you in some respect. So it's a real example of an author and a character kind of merging in the public consciousness in a way that is uncanny and prescient and relevant to our current political circumstance, in a way that few older books are. I was in fact re-listening to a pod I did with Last Things and Lomez on the great male narcissist writers.
I remember that one. That was a great episode.
Thanks. Yeah. And so we talked about Philip Roth. We talked about John Updike. We talked about Norman Mailer. And these are all writers who are, more contemporary than John Kennedy Toole. Nevertheless, I think their sensibilities are more antiquated. Their, experiences are more foreign. And, we, at least, the people on our side of the internet who are all in some sense outsiders, where, we're closer to Toole than we are to Updike. And this is a novel, A Confederacy of Dunces, that every frog should read.
I think I'm gonna let it kind of sit there and end it right there. I think you said it all. With that,
thank you, TR.
Dan. Anything you wanna shill before we head out?
So yeah, I mean, obviously, NUTCrankr. If you're listening to this episode, you probably know what NUTCrankr is. It's my novel. It can be purchased on Amazon. It was published by Terror House Press. You can buy it on Terror House's website. You should listen to my podcast with Matt Pegas called New Right. That's right with a WRITE. And we've had on UTR and many others, and and have a great season planned for the new year. And my Substack as well, danbaltic.substack.com. I am going to very soon release the first chapter of NUTCrankr 2 on my Substack. And we'll continue to release chapters there until the book is finished, at which point a printed edition will be available. So that is Okay, that's not it for my shilling. I'm sorry, but
Go
there's
ahead.
one final item. White Boy Summer. They make excellent apparel, t-shirts, what have you. They have made t-shirts for the good old boys. Well, I have sat down with the good folks at White Boy Summer, and very soon coming at you are Nut Army Elite t-shirts. You want to be wearing one of these, so when women see you, they know to stay far away. Wear your Nut Army Elite t-shirt. Buy it from White Boy Summer.
I think I'm gonna have to order 10.
It'll your wife will be happy.
Oh, most
It'll
definitely.
keep the ladies
I can already see the nervous smile on her face
away.
as I click add to cart.
Women love NUTCrankr.
That is objectively true.
Thank you for having me on, TR. It's been great.
I thank you for coming on, and thank you for talking about your favorite book.
Absolutely.
This is TR Hudson for the Double Dealer magazine. This has been Canon Fodder, Episode 3, A Confederacy of Dunces with Dan Baltic. And if you'd like to support this podcast and the Double Dealer magazine, you can buy one of our issues. Issue 11 is coming out end of December. You can also subscribe on Substack and become one of our paid members. We're going to keep everything free, so except for the magazine, of course. But if you want to support us, you want to support writers and artists, go ahead and subscribe to our Substack. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.